Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Switch to the phone company that supports your beliefs. All plans start under $50 before taxes and surcharges. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special offer.
Once in a while, our adversaries, both in the secular world and in the church, have a good idea. They give us an example of how things should be done. You see other Catholic commentators kind of adopting a similar idea. I think Tim Gordon, with his rules for retrogrades idea, taking a page out of Saul Alinsky to kind of use the spirit of the same kind of tactics or reclaiming Christendom from the people who use those very tactics to take it from us, can be adopted. I think there's an argument for it. Whether you're comfortable with some of those ideas or not, let me know. I think that's why Mr. Gordon took those ideas and kind of recrafted them into some new rules for retrogrades that are inspired by Mr. Alinsky or in response to what he had to do. And I'm not endorsing Saul Alinsky here by any stretch of the imagination. However, the German bishops accidentally gave an idea out there that really shows you how they have been pushing for their radical revolution in the church. And it might be worth considering for Catholics who want the actual Catholic faith, who want a restoration of their masses. But the key is, you'll need a courageous bishop in your diocese to do this, or a priest willing to risk getting canceled. A priest willing to challenge his bishop, to challenge Rome to act one way or the other. I don't think Traditionis Custodes is going to get overturned until you get at least an equal number of bishops unfettering the traditional masses in their diocese to counterbalance what the new Bishop of Austin has done, or the bishop in San Antonio has done, or what the bishop in Charlotte or Detroit have done since Pope Leo's election. You may be aware in those dioceses, the priests were forced to end their Latin masses when their bishops issued rules that exceeded anything said in Traditionis Custodes, and they basically ended the mass in their diocese. And so here's what the German bishops had to say. Now, they didn't say this themselves. They published an article, an opinion piece by a lay scholar on their website. But remember, this is the official news arm of the German bishops. And when they publish things like this, you can take it as an endorsement, unless there's a disclaimer. And there's no disclaimer on this article. So we go here to katholisch.de under this interesting headline: Creative Grassroots Work Instead of Papal Bean Counting. So this was published just a few days ago by the German bishops, and the article posits that, as Catholics, whenever the Pope says something, yes, of course, we should pay attention to what the Pope says. We shouldn't count the beans, as it were, try to get to the minutiae to figure out what it all means. The Church, while the Pope is the symbol of unity in the Church, and more than just a symbol, he is the unity factor in the Church, as well as the creed and the faith and other things. But the unity in the faith is around the papacy. Instead of just trying to read into whatever the Pope says, whatever we want to read into it, remember that the Church acts locally. That the most important place in your church life as a Catholic is your parish. That's where your sacraments are coming from. That is where your kids are going to be baptized, where presumably your own requiem mass will be said someday. It's your parish life that you should be concerned most with, first and foremost. And that is where change can happen. Now, he's going to propose something here, and that is that if you want to see progressive change in the church, you should focus on your parish. Of course they say that. That's how they took the church over. Really, was one mechanism was through taking over their parishes. But the other way, or the other thing we can take from this, is as traditional Catholics, if you are someone who can't bring yourself to drive a long distance to a Latin Mass, but you'd really love to have one, start working on your priest. Start getting like-minded friends of yours to start working in the chancery office and other things. Now, of course, you're going to run into a problem here. And that problem is your local parish office is going to probably be staffed by people who basically think of themselves as the parish, and they impose their ideas on the parish or on the priest and put pressure on him and maybe keep tabs on him. Too many stories like that out there for it to not be the case in most places. to ensure that a progressive vision is implemented. That's how it works. The lay running parishes has been a disaster since Vatican II. Here's what this author at Catholish.de has to say. It's not a terribly long article. Quote, Pope Leo XIV gives his first programmatic interview, and the Catholic world begins to count the beans. What exactly did he say? Is this a step backward, or is the US-born Pope open to a church that truly takes the people of the world seriously? These analyses are both fascinating and politically relevant, since the Pope is, after all, the head of the church. However, they overlook a crucial factor for the life of faith. Rome is far away. The church doesn't live primarily in Rome, but locally, in parishes and communities all over the world in a very different social context and cultural environments. Solutions and concepts must emerge there, in an emergency, even as a leap over the gaps and inconsistencies produced by the central authorities around the Vatican. For in a multipolar world, new expressions of faith must be found again and again, everywhere. Not least of all, the church in Germany is often criticized for insisting too much on rules, on laws and guidelines, and waiting for instructions from headquarters instead of just doing things. There is something to that. What role do women play? How do we deal with people outside of traditional ways of life? In a specific congregation, it is about specific people, and they should find a solution in their faith that works locally. Instead of always making a big impact with guidelines and directives, it is often more sensible to simply lead the way locally as a living church, to experiment and respond to people. The Pope in Rome is important as the keeper of unity, but under the umbrella of the one Catholic Church there has always been a great diversity of forms. Therefore, lead the way with actions, celebrate the faith locally. Instead of waiting for impulses from above, it is better to prepare the ground at the grassroots level. And, like the quote, and you know what? He's not wrong. He's coming to this from a very German Catholic kind of way, meaning lady deacons, priestesses, blessings for James Martin types, all of that stuff. It's wrong on all that stuff. That's what the church in Germany promotes. But I would dare say we could make strides if we started working locally. After all, it seems to be the signal from many bishops and cardinals that the Pope is going to lighten up on the Latin Mass. I tend to not think that's going to happen, but it could, and I'd like to be wrong. But a lot of cardinals seem to think that that's what's happening, and it could very well be that they're laying the groundwork through essentially trying to put a media pressure on him in a respectful kind of way. But you could do this. You could have yourself start a Catholic catechesis group for married couples to talk about the church's teachings on activity suited to the married state. Now, you've got to know what you're talking about before you're approaching the priest on this, but this could be how you reiterate what the church has said about James Martin things, and not just the endless debate about what married couples can and cannot do, but to really broaden this out to the more meta picture, and that is the undermining of the church's teachings on morality. Bring in contraceptive talk, all of those things. You can do much to restore the traditional teachings of the faith yourself in your parish. Or if you're not the kind to lead these things, find someone in your church community who's very opinionated and actually, has their stuff together, as they say, who would be good for leading this stuff, and work on your priest. Now, obviously, if for whatever reason you go to Mass at a parish where the priest is preaching from the Catechism of James Martin and Pope Francis and is a full-throated Bergoglian, essentially, you may not want to do that there. You might want to find a new parish instead. But things happen locally. And that is how you put pressure on things, is to start locally. I'm not saying you can, get your ordinary form parish that has got, that has clown masses and everything to become super trad. But maybe it's time for people to take advantage of the unknown situation that people think we're in right now. I tend to think we're not in an unknown situation, but at least much would become clearer if lay people were to lead, and not just with a microphone, but with actual action in their parish. You might be surprised, by the way, if you talk to some of the ushers and things at your parish, that many of those people might actually be like-minded with you. And perhaps, if you know your priest very well, you can get to know him, and you might find out that if he's a relatively young priest, that he'd love to offer the traditional Mass, but has some blockages, some things blocking him from the chancery office, from, the diocesan offices, keeping him from doing that. And you might be able to organize with him to support his efforts. So a lot of things you can do. Don't be afraid to take a lesson from the other side on how they did things. It's just a toolkit. Their Catholic action, if you want to call it that, is just a toolkit. As long as you work ethically, as long as you work in keeping with the faith. Not an ends justify the means. Don't do anything that violates the Catholic faith. But after all, powers that be in Rome have repeatedly declared this is the age of the laity. The laity will save the church. They said that with Vatican II. Maybe it's time to take them at their word. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.